kids. I'm so glad to see you again this morning. I hope you had a great week. Before we start our lesson, let's look at some photos from our week. Thank you so much for sharing your photos from this week. I hope you guys had a fabulous week. So we're going to be reading in the Gospel of Luke chapter 19 this morning. But before we do that, I want to take a minute and review a little bit about what we've been learning the last few months. So we've been studying the Gospels and how that they teach us about the life that Jesus lived while he was here on earth. Remember, they teach us about how Jesus lived and what Jesus did, like the miracles that he did, and then they also teach us about what Jesus taught, the lessons that he taught us. And so we've been studying things that he did, like the miracles of feeding the 5,000 and healing the blind man. And we also learned about the things that Jesus taught about how his kingdom is upside down from the kingdom that we live in, right? It's better to be humble in God's kingdom. And things like money are not as important to God as people. And so we learned about that. We also saw how he treated people, like how he treated the Samaritan woman, and how Jesus cared about people. Not necessarily the people that the world cares about, the people who are famous or rich, but the people that turn to him, and if they seek him, they will find him. And we learned lots of things about God's kingdom through the life that Jesus lived. Now we're going to be seeing an interesting part of the life that Jesus lived here on earth. And that happens in Luke chapter 19. We see that Jesus is going to be coming into Jerusalem. And that was the main Jewish city. And it was a really big deal because Passover was coming. Now, we've learned a little bit about Passover in the past. We've studied how it was a celebration of a reminder of when God rescued the Jewish people from Egypt. Remember in the 10 plagues, we studied that, and the last plague was the death of the firstborn. But that if the people had put the blood of a lamb on their doorpost, the angel of death would pass over, and their home would be spared. They wouldn't have the death of the firstborn in their home. And so every year, the Jewish people remembered that through that time when they left out of Egypt, that God rescued them from their bondage, and they were able to leave to head towards the promised land. And so every year the Jewish people celebrated that, and they still do. It's a very big deal. And so Jesus was going into Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And so this is going to be even more special than just a normal time in Jerusalem. So as Jesus is going near, he sends his disciples to get a colt, a young donkey, for him to ride in on. And so he says to his disciples to bring the colt to him, and that if anyone asks them what they're doing with it, to tell them that the Lord has need of it. So we're going to start in Luke chapter 19, verse 32, and this is what it says. So those who were sent away to get the colt and found it, just as Jesus had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, the Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, and throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. And as he was drawing near, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." So here we see Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, and this is towards the end of his life. This is the last time that he will enter Jerusalem. And so he's coming in, and he sent some of his disciples to bring a colt. And so Jesus is riding on this donkey into Jerusalem. And what happens as he's coming in? Well, it says his disciples began to praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Now, does any of that sound familiar? It does. If we're very familiar with the story of Jesus' birth, that's something that we hear then, right? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Those are things that we hear at the very beginning of the book of Luke when Jesus is born. And so this is a reminder to us that we can remember that all of this was part of God's plan from the very beginning when Jesus was born in Bethlehem until now when Jesus is coming into Jerusalem for the last time. All of this is part of one big plan. It's part of God's plan to fix our sin problem. And so what do we see? We see they're all praising God and they're worshiping Jesus, and then the Pharisees are still in the crowd. Remember, the Pharisees and Jesus are not on the same page. They do not want people to be worshiping Jesus. And so they say, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples. Tell them to hush." But what does Jesus say? He says, "I tell you, if they were silent, the rocks would cry out." So what they were doing, praising God, praising Jesus as the King, was appropriate. It was exactly what they should have been doing because Jesus is the King. And in this moment, before lots of things are going to happen during the next week that we're going to be studying in the next few weeks, but for this one little moment, people are worshiping Jesus as the King. And that is exactly what he was. Now we're going to see that he was not the king that they had in their mind. They were thinking of a king who was going to throw over the Romans and sit on a throne and have an earthly kingdom. But all the things that we've learned about the kingdom that Jesus was teaching about was not like any earthly kingdom that they had ever seen. It was an upside down kingdom, a kingdom where things are very different. But just for this moment, they were doing what they should, and they were worshiping Jesus as the King. And that is something that we can focus on this week. We can remember that Jesus is our King, that Jesus did come in the name of the Lord. He was coming to make right all of the things that were wrong in our world. Now, over the next few months, we're going to be studying about the things that happened after this, the things that are going to be happening in the week that is following this thing, the triumphal entry, this amazing entry into Jerusalem. And so I really look forward to studying that with you. But this week I want you to think about how we can worship Jesus as King and how we can remember that he really is the answer to all of our sin problem. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.